Jason Moorhouse, you're seeking re-election, Arbory, Castletown and Malew. What would you say, looking back on the period that's just gone, was your most significant achievement in the outgoing administration?
I think when you actually look at what I've done, I've really been a community MHK. I've been there as the link between local people and national government. I've asked a huge number of questions. I've brought several motions, and my emphasis has really been on ensuring that we move forward as an island, but also that local people have their problems resolved.
Now, you entered politics after a career in teaching. Have you found your academic background to be a useful tool in your armoury?
Oh yeah, tremendously useful. In terms of having that economic background, it's been a key factor when the budgets have been looked at, when we had the debate in June in terms of the bond for the £400 million, which I question and at the end of the day did vote against, but that's been really useful. But also, actually working in school for 20 years has allowed me to be really flexible. And I think that's really important as an MHK. You're responding to different things at different times of the day, and people said, it must be so different to teaching, but in many ways it's identical.
So there are some parallels.
Huge numbers, yeah.
Now, the constituency has three distinct areas. As a local MHK, do you consider them independently as such?
It was something that really did surprise me in 2016 when I said that there was a need to actually have a clear set of ideas for each of the three areas. And once I was elected, I made sure that I got to the commissioners' meetings as often as possible. And it's really clear from the local people, the commissioners, and the history of the areas that they are really different. And they've got different needs, but also the people within those areas are often seeing things quite differently. And that was a real shock, because when I was teaching and I was actually looking at students from the south of the island, it was something I never really picked up on. But yeah, I think it's really important, and to actually value that tradition is really important.
Now, one of your stated priorities, you say you want to help build a government that recognises it's the people's money that they're spending. Now, that implies that you're not comfortable with aspects of the outgoing administration's spending record.
Yeah, when I was elected in 2016, I had a real hope that we would have policies that were much more business-like, and I feel that we've gone down the road of getting corporate debt rather than making better use of our assets. The reserves have done tremendously well, and it's been a real achievement during COVID to see the reserves holding up as it did. And I was really worried in June, Tynwald, when we actually were faced with this situation of, rather than managing with what we had, create this 400 million debt pile. Going forward, that is an issue. And when you actually look at what it's been spent on, we've got £50 million of infrastructure spend, which could be potentially anything, and the rest is simply refinancing debts in the MUA and the steam packets. There's nothing really new there. If you're going to invest, you want something that's worthwhile, something like the new school at Castletown. That was a big spend that we should have been seeing more inroads in terms of development during the last 5 years.
But on a personal level, do you think you've been vocal enough in challenging where you see spending profligacy?
Oh gosh, yes. Every budget I've spoken, I've raised many questions on it. In the debate about the £400 million sovereign debt, I was one of the few speakers there, and only two of us voted against it. So yeah, I have raised concerns, and I have not actually left them there. I've actually pushed it, and I've spoken to the minister, and hopefully that my words, even though they haven't made a massive difference, they will have had some impact.
If you're re-elected, do you see yourself potentially as holding a ministry?
That's not for me to decide. It would be an interesting one. I brought a motion in June about the size and cost of government, and it was an interesting debate. And one thing that really shone through that debate was the way in which we are you being served in terms of the way the government works? We've got DEFA here, we've got infrastructure here, we've got education here, And as a small island, we should be much more dynamic. We should be more like Google. We should be working together and moving things forward. And it was at that point I thought, yeah, it is worth signing again, because if I was to get the chance to be a minister, I could perhaps incorporate that into the system, and step by step we can get change. So my reluctance to actually just go automatically straight back into politics at the end of this term, in the way I actually didn't announce my candidacy until quite late on, well into July. It was a case of, making sure I got a way forward. And I think potentially, if the opportunity were to arise, that was something that would be positive.
Now, helping hard-pressed families with targeted support is another key area that you've identified. Can you provide any specific areas of concern?
Yeah, I was really lucky to be on the Poverty Committee, and that's opened up a lot of doors. I've been able to go to GRI and the Food Bank and the Salvation Army on a relatively regular basis. And when you talk to people in the position of needing help, they're often quite guarded. I turn up as an MHK, and it's difficult to talk and explain the situation you're in. And those third sector agencies have been tremendous in filling that gap. And what the Poverty Committees try to do is look at how the government can be more proactive and assist in that area. And in July 21, we were able to bring 12 recommendations, and the Treasury supported all of them and all got the nod to go forward. It was incredible because, we kind of did push things on certain of the recommendations. And when the Treasury Minister came back and he said, we're happy with this, and the same with the Policy and Reform Minister, they could see the value of it, because those people are the ones in most need. And as an economist, you kind of torn, because you're often thinking, well, if you're giving government handouts, isn't that bad? But these are the people who spend all that money in the local economy. Local businesses benefit, they benefit, and you get that real benefit for the whole of society. So, it's something that's moved forward in terms of the last 5 years, and I think that's important to keep mind of going forward, definitely.
But even with all that, things are probably worse than they were. We're seeing more people at the food banks. We have a charity such as Housing Matters, which has seen the number of people desperate for help rise from around 30 when they started to, I think it was 170 most recently. The situation is getting worse.
Yeah, it is really concerning. The government has moved forward in terms of finding the permanent accommodation. They've supported GRIVE. They've come up with a policy which is going to enable something to be constructed in the relatively near future. But your point is a strong one, and the impact of COVID was massive. People just realised that the position they were in was untenable, and so many asked for help. It's been interesting talking to Housing Matters over the past few days in terms of the number of people actually requiring a home, something so basic. It's affecting lots of local people. And I think 10 years ago, we were in denial. It was something we couldn't really envisage. And teaching in a school, you actually saw aspects of poverty, how it did impact on children. And one of the best things about the poverty report was that recommendation about the school meals, and the way it's not going to be just linked now to benefits. There are going to be other ways in to support those children. That's a huge change. And there may be small steps, but we're getting there, hopefully.
Where do you stand on climate change? Do you accept the principle that a global warming is happening because of man's activities? And how can the changes be made to our lifestyles here on the island without a significant financial burden to the less well-off?
I think this is a really, really important area. And I think it should be looked at in terms of an opportunity. And in terms of the last aspect of your question, in terms of those poorer people, they're the ones who can benefit the most in terms of if we get the balance right. If we look at things like insulating homes, buildings are one of the biggest emitters of these gases. If there's a proper scheme available, those people will be warm, they'll have lower bills, and they'll have better standards of living. In a debate about 3 months ago, I raised the question that we're actually in a situation where potentially an electric car is about as realistic to many people as a trip to the moon. and we need to keep it realistic. Government can do the big projects, but most of the key changes are going to be in the hands of local people, and we've got to make an attractive option, an option they can benefit from, and by doing that we'll get things moving forward. I feel that in the last 5 years the process has been slow, and I remember it was the question I asked about a humble turnip. It was being sold in a local store in plastic, and a constituent came to see me and said, "This is outrageous," and she placed the turnip on the table and she said, "I want you to find out from the Environment Minister why this is happening." And I spoke to him and I said, I'm going to ask this question because I think it's important. And he spoke to me later and he said, "We've got avoiding terms of our environmental legislation." And that led to all the legislation we've had. And in July we started to see the grants coming back, and hopefully we'll see a lot more by the next government. But really it's making it attractive for people so they can change, because it's people that are basically causing the problem. And if you can make it easy for them, then we can get the change that we all want.
Now, your constituency has seen major development recently, probably as much as any other constituency on the island. You've seen a new housing estate. Do you welcome the development, and would you like to see more?
I think development is always good in that it brings new people and new ideas into a community. The problem is, though, that at the same time the infrastructure is going to get stressed. We've got schools that are reaching capacity. We've got doctor surgeries that are getting in a similar position. We've got a lot of cars on the road. So we need to look at the wider implications of this. And I think it's really important that we actually identifying the needs for the new school were realistic, because in terms of the current situation, the new school isn't actually reflecting that growth. And it's really important that we don't end up with something that doesn't fit current requirements. So we need to look at the whole impact, and at the moment I'm not sure that's actually happening.
You mentioned a new school. Education has been very much in the spotlight for the last couple of years during the pandemic. Is the Education Authority functioning properly? Are we doing a good job? And as a former teacher, what would you do differently?
I think education was in a terribly concerning situation around 3 years ago. I was at the Comis Hotel for another reason, and I was there that evening when the teachers turned up to have the union meeting, and I was shocked by the number of teachers, the number of former colleagues who were quite laid back, rarely attended union meetings, and they got to the point where they were really, really frustrated. I was lucky to be on the education committee that assessed the new education bill, and one of the concerns that we raised was we were jumping ahead too quickly. We needed time to reassess where we were, to reassure teachers that we were listening to them, and by removing the education bill, by looking at the current situation, by looking at the recommendations of Beeman's, I think that we're in a better place. But the education system is incredibly stressed. All the pressures that's being placed on them because of COVID and having to work remotely, and all the issues with the exams, it is a real difficult area. And whether Dr. Allinson continues as Minister for Education or someone else comes in, it's going to be an area where you actually need to be looking at the needs of the teachers, because they are really stressed, and they need to be given that reassurance that they're being listened to and they're getting the adequate rewards and the support that they need.
Now, you've been a member of the Department of Health and Social Care, but you broke ranks and criticised the government's easing of border restrictions recently. Do you believe they made the wrong call?
Yeah, definitely. I was really concerned that we were marching forward, and when those regulations were brought back to Tynwald on the Friday afternoon with a small change in terms of the hour when the regulations would be implemented, it felt a real slap, because so many constituents had raised concerns. Simple things like testing people as they came onto the island, things like saying those people returning to the island needed to wear masks, just simple things that were being implemented in jurisdictions like Jersey. and the council ministers weren't listening, and they voted against us having the opportunity to question the Director of Public Health on this. And it was probably my worst moment in the last 5 years, that what we were doing was so different to what people were asking for. And it wasn't anything big, it was just small, slight change. We wanted free movement to continue, but we want to do it in an appropriate way. We can't remove all risks, but we can actually reduce them. And that really was concerning, that there were only 5 MHKs prepared to stand up and say, could we look at the wider issues, please?
So do you believe the current situation is out of control?
I feel it's a difficult situation. I feel that many people see it's out of control, and on the doorstep you can really sense the fear. People have been through tough times with 3 lockdowns. They're now in a situation where they're not quite sure how to behave. We've got people dying, we've got people in hospital, and we've got this big scary phrase, we've got to live with it, being repeated and repeated. And we know we've got to live with it, but we've got to have that reassurance that if something can be done to reduce the chance of people being ill, we actually do that.
Now, over the term of the last government, you've been referred to in the past as the quiet man of Tynwald, yet by the same token, you've asked an awful lot of questions. I suppose that's an odd paradox.
Yeah, and I think it's the way you change and you respond. I was able to make the headlines on the front page of a local paper within 7 weeks of the new parliament beginning, and it seemed slightly early, but it did change my perspective on what was required. And from then on, I did a monthly update on Facebook. I've done that every month, explain what I've done and looking at the community and issues like that. But I've also been prepared to ask ministers questions if they've not come back with suitable answers, either one-to-one or using email. And it's been quite interesting that over the years, more people have come up to me saying, could you have a look at this area? Could you push this forward? And I think questions have become a really useful area. But having said that, I did bring a motion in July, Timor, which unfortunately we didn't get to. And I was actually asking if the council of ministers would actually look at the current situation in terms of answers from officers and ensure there was actually a time where the officers would respond by, but also the quality of the answer. Because at the moment, if I was to send an email to a minister or an officer, I may not get an answer for several days, several weeks, or even several months. And I feel that's wrong. And it's really unfortunate that that motion didn't get pushed through, because I feel that whoever's elected in September will have that need to actually get things done. When a constituent contacts you by email, they want an answer, not in 3 months' time, but today. And if you got that initial response from a minister saying this is being looked at, and you knew there'd be a substantive answer within 2 weeks, it would cut off the need to actually ask questions in Tynwald and Keys. So they are useful, but there will be better solutions.
Now, in the past, you've said you would support the media's editorial rights being controlled by the Chief Minister during a specific limited case of extreme national importance. What did you mean by that?
It was an unfortunate case that happened about 3 years ago. The Chief Minister was giving a statement about a particular area of concern, and the way the material was delivered wasn't of the highest standard, and it involved him having to leave the room. It involved the people from the media discussing it. It involved a less than adequate response. And I felt that when that went out, it detracted completely from what was the Chief Minister's statement on a particular issue of national importance. When I said that, it was very specific, and it was a case where when the Chief Minister's calling you in to identify something, and I was at the time really aware that it could be the thin end of the wedge and it could lead to other issues. But at the same time, I was concerned that when a Chief Minister does give a statement, it should have that presidential impact that people around the world, when they see it on Facebook or YouTube, whatever it is, recognise that it's the leader of the Isle of Man, and they don't see all the triviality in the 2 or 3 minutes that goes with it. And it was really that kind of protect the island, the island's people, and the actual people giving that statement at the time. So it was a moment in time where I was concerned, yeah.
Finally, why should the people of your constituency put the name Moorhouse alongside their ballot paper?
I think 5 years ago, I was someone new. I'm now someone who's been tried and tested. I'm ready to make progress for you, your family and the island. I believe I can make a real difference, and hopefully you will consider voting for me again. Thank you.